The radio silence didn't happen all at once. It happened gradually, over weeks. The way a conversation gets harder and more spaced out until one day you realize nobody is calling anymore. You are Sergei Krikalev, flight engineer, 33 years old. On May 18, 1991, you boarded a Soyuz capsule and launched to the Mir space station in orbit 400 kilometers above the Earth. The mission was 5 months. You'd be back in October, cattled. There was a new crew coming to relieve you, scheduled flights, everything on the timeline. The problem is that between May and October of 1991, the Soviet Union stopped existing. Not all at once. Not in an explosion. In a slow, bureaucratic, simultaneously inevitable, and absurd unraveling. In August, a coup attempt against Gorbachev failed, but left the country in a state of paralysis. Quote, Soviet republics began declaring independence one by one. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Georgia, Kazakhstan, where the Baikonur Cosmodrome that launched you was located, also declared independence. The Soviet space program suddenly wasn't quite sure who it belonged to, who was paying its bills, or who had the authority to make decisions. In October of 1991, no capsule arrived to relieve you. The flight was canceled for financial and logistical reasons. You would remain in orbit for a few more months while things got sorted out. A few more months, Mir was a space station built to be occupied by crews of 2 to 3 cosmonauts. When your mission crewmate, Anatoly Artsebarsky, returned to Earth in October, you were left alone. Alone in a pressurized module the size of a 2-bedroom apartment, 400 kilometers away from every other human being circling the Earth at 4.5 miles per second. Mir was not comfortable. The equipment was outdated even by 1991 standards. The air smelled of hot metal, machine oil, and the specific odor of aging plastics in a pressurized environment. A smell you had gotten used to but could never entirely stop noticing. The humidity was high. Every wall was covered with cables, control panels, scientific instruments, storage bags. There was very little clean open space anywhere. Core daily work involved station maintenance, scientific experiments, and mandatory physical exercise. In microgravity, without the weight of your body working against your muscles and bones, the human body deteriorates quickly. 2 hours of exercise every single day, just to maintain the minimum muscle mass and bone density needed to walk when you returned to Earth. You pedal a stationary bike and work resistance bands while the Earth passes below you every 92 minutes. December of 1991. The Soviet Union formally dissolved on December 25th. Mikhail Gorbachev resigned the presidency of a country that no longer existed. Communications with Mir were routed through control centers in territory that was now Russia and Kazakhstan. There were unpaid debts. There were disputes over who controlled which infrastructure. The technicians working at the ground control centers sometimes went weeks without receiving their salaries. Probably from where you were. 400 kilometers up, the changes were subtle but unmistakable. Communications became less frequent. There were moments when you attempted contact and the silence stretched longer than it should have. When connections did happen, there was a different quality to the voices, more strained, more tired, sometimes clearly distracted by things you knew were happening but couldn't see. The Soviet Union was coming apart, and from your station you were hearing it in Morse code, in signal quality, in the rhythm of the responses. You found out you had become a symbol when Western journalists started asking questions during the public transmissions. There was something of a dark comedy to the situation. A cosmonaut stranded in space while his country dismantled the bureaucracy that had put him there. Western newspapers called you the last Soviet citizen. Not cruelly, with a mix of fascination and condescension. You were a powerful image, a man floating in vacuum while the entire world changed below him. What the journalists didn't describe was the daily reality. The identical days, the circular window with the same planet below, turning, always turning. The blue of Brazil passing, the white of Antarctica passing, the Mediterranean passing, the orange of the Sahara passing, a sunset and a sunrise every 92 minutes, 16 sunsets per day. At some point, you more or less stopped counting. Loneliness has different textures in orbit. It isn't the loneliness of being in a strange city. It's the mathematical loneliness of being physically separated from all of humanity by 400 kilometers of vacuum in every direction. You could see cities at night, small clusters of golden light in the dark of the continents. Moscow, St. Petersburg, the chain of light that is Western Europe. You could see them, but you couldn't touch them. You couldn't call them. You couldn't breathe their air. There was a professional commitment you maintained through all of it. Krikalev was considered one of the most capable flight engineers in the Soviet space program. Even alone, even knowing that your return depended on political and financial conditions completely outside your control, you kept Mir running. You conducted experiments. You filed reports. You performed routine maintenance because it was what there was to do. And because stopping implied accepting that the situation was something other than a temporary administrative inconvenience. In March of 1992, Russia, now a different country from the Soviet Union that had launched you, finally managed to organize a relief mission. On March 25, 1992, you boarded the Soyuz capsule and returned to Earth. 294 days in orbit, more than 9.5 months, the longest solo mission record at that time. When the capsule opened, you needed help getting out. Your feet didn't recognize the ground. Your legs, without real weight-bearing work for nearly 10 months, needed days to readjust. You were slightly taller than when you had left. Your spine had decompressed without gravity. The daylight, even filtered through the haze over Kazakhstan, felt harsh after months of sunlight through filtered windows. The country you had left no longer existed. The city where you lived still had the same name, but not the same transportation system, the same currency, or the same government. Colleagues you had left working in a unified space program were now employed by agencies of different countries, when there was still money to pay for their specialties. You came back to Earth in a world different from the one you had left. That happens to travelers. It happens to prisoners. Couldn't it happen sometimes to astronauts who stayed in orbit long enough for the Earth below them to become a different place?